Deadbeat Philosophy podcast. I'm your host, Dave Baumeister, and with me today is myself, because this is the very first episode in a, potentially unending series of future episodes that are going to explore the world, philosophy, politics, and the contradictions of modern life, as I like to put it, from a uniquely deadbeat angle. So what is deadbeat philosophy? The idea here is to present and do philosophy in a more experimental, you might say public, but I would just say off-kilter, a little bit off-brand, a little marginal, a little different, to try to do philosophy in a way that most professional academic philosophers aren't doing, don't seem to care to do, and aren't really equipped to do. Go to deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com to subscribe to the Deadbeat newsletter, to be apprised of updates with the Deadbeat podcast, all the YouTube content, and all the other things we're doing. And then especially there on the webpage, what I'm going to be offering during the year 2025 is an inside look at the construction of 3 philosophical texts. So I'm writing sort of live as you speak, 3 different books that are going to be built up of sections of smaller posts that are going to be posted weekly. And then those are going to build up into larger books by the end of the year. And some of that material I have written and I'm working on, and some I'm going to be writing as we go. So that's also going to be an experiment just in writing philosophy and a sort of crowdsourced philosophy. So if you're into that sort of thing, especially go and subscribe to the newsletter. Also at deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com, you can, if you're interested and able and generous, please, you can there support the channel financially. So you can subscribe as a monthly subscriber or an annual subscriber or even a founding member, where I'll send you a drawing in the mail, draw one of my mazes that you'll see on the page, one of those, and I'll send it to you. I'll kiss it as well if you want, wearing some lipstick even. So just go to that webpage to support me if you'd like, to keep this channel going in this experimental year of 2025. What's the Hegel-Haus Museum, you ask? Well, just the best darn philosophy museum in town. Actually, it's one of the only philosophy museums that I can think of in the world. Now, post in the comments other philosophy museums that you know or that you've attended, but for me, the Hegel-Haus Museum stands up there with like the top 3 or 5 at the least. It may be the best. This is a wonderful museum, whether or not you like Hegel. Hegel was tremendously important and influential, led a very interesting and eventful life. You can learn about him there. This is the house that he was born in. The house survived the Second World War, even though many other houses around it were bombed. The museum has done a wonderful job of presenting Hegel's thought, not just his life, so you can kind of learn about Hegelian concepts like dialectic and spirit and nature and logic and history and how all these things work together. It's done in a very tasteful way, and the city of Stuttgart, to whom the museum belongs, really cares for this legacy in this part of the city. So come also visit just Stuttgart. It's a beautiful city, the city I live in, the city I love. And come to the Hegel-Haus Museum. Check out more about them at hegelhaus.de. All right. So thanks. You've learned about the channel. You've learned about me. You've learned about the Hegel-Haus Museum. I hope you subscribe to the podcast. I hope you subscribe to the YouTube channel. I hope you go and subscribe to the newsletter at deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com. I hope you go learn about the Hegel-Haus Museum at hegelhaus.de. And then finally, I hope you stick around and just, enjoy this journey that we can be on over the months and weeks ahead. So here, just to give you a taste of what you might expect, is a nice little slice of my conversation with Thibaud Henin, which will be upcoming and feature in a future episode. And this is Thibaud and I talking about extraterrestrial life and the ethics of it. And it gives you a little bit of a Vorspeise, as the Germans would say, an appetizer of what's to come. So tune in. Here we go with Thibaud Henin. See you later, everybody. Bye. Thibaud Henin, thanks for being here. I got a speculative question for you. So this is one that kind of connects with interplanetary beings. Like we've talked a little bit about Mars. And it's like a thought experiment that I talked about once with my environmental philosophy class. But so imagine there's like a comet that is going to crash into one of 2 asteroids, and humans have control over which asteroid the comet crashes into. And when the comet crashes into that asteroid, it'll completely destroy it, including everything on it. And there are 2 of these asteroids floating out there. And one has, let's say, like 10,000 human beings living on there. It's like a colony.
but of the, there's humans in other places as well. And then on the other asteroid is like a colony of like 100 seabirds, and it's just they're the last of their kind, and they're there on that thing. So, and when the asteroid hits the comet with the seabirds, it'll not only kill those 100 seabirds, but it'll make that species extinct. And it's, there's no like genetic copy or one in a zoo or something. There's just like, for the purpose of argument, assume it's fully extinct. And then the other one, of course, with the 10,000 humans, the species will not be extinct. There are plenty of other humans in other places. So which asteroid do you think the comet ought to collide with, and why?
But humans living on an asteroid, like, what is their existence like? Are they like subsistence, like miserable, suffering? Because, like, I don't know, low gravity, like speeding through space. Like, are we doing them a favor by ending their existence? Because I don't know, like an asteroid existence, again, it doesn't sound very pleasant to me.
Well, let's take the caveat that at least it's like it's a pretty habitable place. Maybe it's like the average well-being of a human alive on the planet today, which is I don't know. I actually heard it's like there's like just this year we've crossed some threshold where like the majority of the planet would be considered like middle class or something, or like above a certain poverty threshold. It depends on, I don't know where I heard this, but it's like extreme poverty is still a huge problem on the planet, but like the average well-being of a human being, if you can quantify that, is like at a record high right now. So maybe like extrapolate that, like assume, just they're kind of like neutral. They're just getting along like anybody today. Because you could make that same argument, you should put people out of their misery today. It depends on how miserable you think their lives are.
They probably just changed the definition of middle class, right? Instead of owning a house and a car, it's like you have an iPad and can watch YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know where you're going with, right? Like how anthropocentric, right? Are we like, do we value all things equally and all lives equally, and how much we like in speciesism and
well, I don't know. I mean, what would you do? What would you do? It's like you have, and one choice has to be made. Like you can't get around it.
Take them out both. Take them out both. You know what? To take them out, take them both out. That's fairness. You know what? I'm not going to choose. You know what?
Mm-hmm. Like what was that? Life like King Midas or whatever with like the baby. That like is that like a Bible tale or whatnot? Like slices the baby in half.
Slice the baby in two, and the one that yeah, exactly. So. But yeah, I mean, okay. Truthfully, I'm a human, and my role in policy is generally to favor humankind. At the same time, to balance that out with nature. I teach environmental assessment at Concordia, and we try to balance this out very practically all the time, right? We run a study, and we try to find mitigation strategies. And at the end of the day, it's this decision, right? You model the population, and maybe you model the humans, and you model the bird species, and you see what, maybe they're going to go extinct anyways, right?
Okay. So just get as many models as you can and model them how they model together.
Exactly. The general thing is more science, right? Well, let's get as much science as possible to make this decision, and then at the end, it's still a value. After spending years and lots of money, you're just going back to the value judgment usually. But so yeah, I suppose if I were having to make a recommendation to a government, I would obviously say get rid of the birds. Mm-hmm. But if I was, going with my environmental ethos, maybe I would say, well, we got lots of humans, or find some sort of middle ground. Can we take some genetic material from the birds to relocate the human? I mean, it's rarely black and white, right?
Yes,
it's rarely that you can't find any mitigation. But I did want to talk. It did bring me this idea of if we're talking about the environment, and I work a lot in this field. And I teach in the field, and there's this sort of tension between science and decision making in environmental issues. And it's interesting because, the science. So I work with a lot of scientists in the geography department at Concordia, for example, but not only there, many other contexts. And the problem they have is, if only the policymakers and decision makers would listen to the scientists and get better numbers, invest more, and have more rigorous science, right? And that's what the answer lies in more and better science.
Okay, and kind of listening to scientists and following through with ideas grounded in science and things, or kind of basically letting scientists call the shots.
Exactly, exactly, right. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, the science, when you look into it, like the science is also very limited, right? There was very famous cases in the United States and also in Canada, for example, the spotted owl, where they just didn't understand the population dynamics of the spotted owl, and they want to protect this owl, and basically, modeling only takes you so far in these complex systems, and even
especially when it comes to owls. I don't know how much firsthand experience you've had with them, but they're very difficult to model. They're also hard to draw. I mean, I guess it depends on how realistic you want to go. But yeah,
I don't know, too big. I mean, I don't know. I feel like elementary school mascot was an owl. We managed as two second graders. Sorry, I got some owls out of construction paper, but. Yeah, so I think there's this sort of tension, right? And at the end, often you go through all this really complex science to sort of state the obvious at the end. Or it comes down to a value judgment regardless, right?
Yeah, and it kind of is just used to justify your value judgment or not, I guess. But the pre-existing value judgment that one is inclined to have more often than not seems to stay, and science gets instrumentalized to it. Or you might just say that like maybe these are matters that science can't resolve on some level. I don't know if you feel
There's no such thing as good data, right? Like the other problem is when it comes, like you can always want better data, better models, better science, and it's always limited, right? And so I think a lot of the time it's instead of asking, do we need to know the exact quantities? Now, it can matter for mitigation measures, it can matter for monitoring, it can matter in a lot of contexts. I'm not saying science doesn't matter, but when it comes to decision making, a lot of times it's perhaps more appropriate to ask, what do we value, right? What are the things we really care about, and then try to prioritize that rather than focusing entirely on the science, because the science can't decide that, right? That's a philosophical question, and I try to bring more of it in my courses now. Have the students reflect on and a lot of times it's very difficult because, for example, environmental assessment, it's this idea that, okay, we want to have some sort of economic activity, usually. It might also be residential, but there's some sort of economic activity that some proponent, government or private actor, wants to undertake. And now you're trying to balance the environmental with that. So it is, on its outset, a question of what do you value? How do you lay the economic activity versus the environmental? Because you basically can't have any economic activity without damaging the environment.
Yes. Yeah, there's always a give and take. Like people want to have their cake and eat it too, but in fact, like there's like what goes up must come down. Like what you do causes equal and opposite reactions and things like that. So it's so you are compelled or almost forced to try to set that scale, to think about that scale, or at least you choose to think about that scale, and maybe more of us could do a better job thinking about it as well.
I think instead of like delegating it to science and make it look like a scientific debate, which sometimes pushes instead of like it's these unelected scientists who are making these trade-offs, or is it putting it to an economist, right? It's really a question among the actors about, first, before you can decide what you do with the numbers, you have to ask, what do you value, right? And that's the sort of heart of it.
Yes.
And that is not something that a scientist or an economist can tell you what we value. And then you pull in the science, right? And you do the best with what you can. But it's interesting. It really brings up a lot of philosophical questions over how we prioritize as society, as individuals, as a city, as whatever the unit is, and it really lays up the conflicts and trade-offs in ways that force actors, decision makers, to really lay out what they value most. And a lot of times individuals or a lot of times citizens or scientists or my students don't agree with that. But
yes, yeah. And then that brings in the other problem of, I guess like of plural voices and of, like a multiplicity of different, not just, if you make values important, then you also have to grapple with the question that there seem to be people value different things. And then how do you reconcile one set of values against another and so on? That did, I agree, raise a lot of great questions, philosophical and otherwise. And I think we'll have to leave it at that and explore some of those more in the future. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with Thibaud Henin. The Deadbeat Philosophy podcast is a co-production of Deadbeat Media and the Museum Hegel-Haus, Stuttgart. For more Deadbeat content and to chip in to keep the channel going, check us out at deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com. For more about the Museum Hegel-Haus, check out hegelhaus.de. That's HEGEL-HAUS.de. Adios and auf Wiedersehen.